Well, hello everybody, Roger here, and welcome to my channel, Rogers Reads. So today I'm doing my May wrap-up part 1. So these are all the books that I've read in the first part of May. Since I usually read about 12 to 14 books a month, I decided I was going to break this up into 2 parts. So given that it's a little bit past the middle of the month, here is part 1 of my wrap-up. So the first book that I read this month was entitled The Miseducation of Cameron Post, written by Emily M. Danforth. So the story takes place in the 1990s and follows a young lesbian teen named Cameron Post, whose parents are unexpectedly killed in a car crash. Now, as it turns out, Cameron, who was 12 years old at the time, had been kissing her friend Irene hours before her parents' death. So she ends up linking these two events in her mind, creating some major guilt in her pre-adolescent thoughts, wondering whether the death of her parents might be God's way of punishing her for that forbidden kiss. So Cam is then sent off to live with her grandmother and her ultra-conservative and ultra-religious Aunt Ruth in Miles City, Montana. As Cameron steps into her teenage years, she comes to accept that she's a lesbian and ends up making another gay friend along the way. But then the story takes quite a surprising and disturbing turn as Cameron is outed to her Aunt Ruth. And as a result, things don't end up too well for our heroine, as Aunt Ruth decides to take drastic action intent on fixing her niece, and ends up sending her to God's Promise, one of those pray away the gay compounds. And the story gets quite interesting from there. You know, I absolutely loved this book, and while it was heartbreaking in places, it was also a beautiful coming-of-age story with a very riveting plot, a strong narrative, and compelling, fleshed-out characters. And I really love this book, and I'm glad I came across it. So the second book that I read this month was a book entitled Detour. It was by Michelle Moore and Risa Herberth. So Detour follows 18-year-old Ethan, who embarks on a road trip shortly after his graduation. We learn that this was a trip Ethan had originally planned on taking with his boyfriend and love of his life, Scott, who was murdered at school the year before by a shooter. It's also worth mentioning that Ethan is suffering from a severe case of a survivor's guilt. So it's dark. The weather is bad, and Ethan nearly runs over a hitchhiker. So despite his family's repeated warnings about never picking up hitchhikers, Ethan offers the hitchhiker a ride. And we learn that his name is Nick, and that he has his own demons that he's running away from. He has just left one of those pray away the gay type of camps called Camp Cornerstone, and is basically homeless and broke at the moment. You know, funny, this is the second book right in a row that I read that revolve around these types of compounds, these pray away the gay compounds, which is a trope that I typically avoid, and it was actually accidental. So anyway, having faith that neither of them is going to kill the other in their sleep, and the topic of stranger danger comes up a couple of times during this story, they decide to embark on Ethan's road trip together. So basically, we have two characters who have gone through horrific events and who are basically broken. They're both confused, hurt, and trying to find themselves in a world that up to this point hasn't proven all that kind. So I really ended up loving this book, though it does break your heart in places, but it's also sweet and playful in others. So Detour is a powerful coming-of-age novel about two boys trying to overcome their pasts. And so in this way, it's a heartbreaking and a heartwarming story at the same time. I highly recommend it. I read this book as an ebook, so hence there's no physical book that I'm holding. Okay, so the third book that I read is entitled 14 Summers by Quinn Anderson. So this story follows identical twins, Aiden and Max. And Max is straight and Aiden is gay. So one day, while home for the summer, they run into their old childhood best friend, Oliver, with whom they've lost touch and hadn't seen in, I think it was about 10 years, and who also happened to be Aiden's childhood crush. So imagine Aiden's surprise when he not only learns that Oliver, who is now quite hot, by the way, is gay, but that he also had a childhood crush on Aiden. So needless to say, once these two reunite, sparks begin to fly. But as Aiden and Oliver's relationship moves from friendship to something deeper, Max feels hurt and excluded, not understanding how his twin brother could choose Oliver over him. And drama ensues. So what really worked for me was that this book stressed the importance of relationships between family and not only those of the romantic kind. So that being said, this wasn't only a story of two childhood friends falling in love, though there was that sweet romance aspect to it, but it was also about the need to give all of the relationships in our life equal importance, not just the romantic ones. The situation in this book reminded me of how friendships often become tested when one of the friends begins dating outside of the friendship, and oftentimes the friendship ends up being neglected. So the situation in this book is magnified given that the friendship being tested is that of identical twin brothers who have spent their entire life with each other and each of whose world revolves around the other. So I enjoyed seeing the both of them adjust the twins as they begin to figure out who they are apart from their twin. So I really ended up loving this book. I found it humorous, lighthearted, and an overall enjoyable read. And for the record, the book ends with a happily ever after. And there was one point near the end of the book where my eyes definitely became moist for a moment. So I received this book as an advanced reader copy, so it's not yet available for purchase. It's expected to be released on May 21st, 2018, which is just a few days from now. So if this book sounds like something you might be interested in reading, be sure to check out your favorite online retailer then. So the next book I read this month was a book entitled Cinder by Marissa Meyer. So this is a dystopian story which takes place in the distant future. I think it was like 100 years after World War IV in the city of New Beijing. And it follows a girl named Lynn Cinder, a teenage cyborg who is a gifted mechanic. So, in this society, cyborgs are mainly considered second-class citizens, less than human, actually. They're shunned by society and pretty much owned by their guardians. Now, Cinder is more or less owned by her wicked stepmother, Adri, I think her name was, and is detested by one of her sisters, though she does get along fairly well with the other one. Now, in this story, there are also people or beings called lunars living on the moon who have the ability to manipulate the minds of humans to see what they want them to see or do what they want them to do. So naturally, the people of the Earth don't allow these beings to reside on Earth because of the danger to humans, though a few of them manage to sneak in. And then there's their evil queen, Lavana, who has a massive army and controls the minds of all the other lunars on the moon. And she appears to be hell-bent on starting a war between the lunars and the earthlings, with the goal eventually of being to take over the Earth. And then there's also an incurable deadly plague that's sweeping through the kingdom and killing off citizens, including people close to Cinder. Then one day, Cinder's life completely changes when the handsome Prince Kai, Kai, I think it's pronounced Kai, stops by Cinder's booth to have her repair his android. Now, she cannot deny the attraction she feels for the prince, but she knows that she can never act, and it's certain that Prince Kai would be repulsed by her should he learn that she's a cyborg. So without giving anything away, let's just say that Cinder discovers a couple of secrets that puts her smack in the center of the struggle between Earth and the moon, and the future of the planet may rest on the decisions she makes. So, I will say that I found the plot of the story gripping with a lot of interesting subplots going on. There's the deadly plague, Cinder's plans of escaping New Beijing, political intrigue between Prince Kai and Prince Lavana, Cinder's own family dynamics, and of course the big reveal of Cinder's childhood and her background. So the storyline was fast-paced enough and the premise original enough that I never found myself bored or impatient during the book. But there was one major thing that ruined this novel for me, and that was the ending, or should I say, the lack of ending. I don't know, I felt that all of the trust that the author had built up during this story was utterly destroyed for me by that cliffhanger ending. And actually, it didn't even feel like a cliffhanger. It was more like the author stopped writing the story in the middle of the book. There was like no plot resolution, no character growth. It just ended. So, if you follow me, you already know my opinion on cliffhangers, so I won't belabor that point. Let me just say that I was extremely disappointed that I purchased a book, and instead of getting an entire book, I ended up getting only part of a book. So I will not be continuing with this series. So the next book that I read is entitled The Poet X, and this is written by Elizabeth Acevedo. This book follows Xiomara, a teenage Dominican girl who has a twin brother. Because of her mature and shapely body, she's often the target of sexual harassment from her peers at school, consisting of endless groping, objectification, and lewd comments, causing her to constantly defend herself with harsh words and her fists. She also often has to defend her brother, Xavier, a shy, meek boy who is bullied at school. Now, her mother is ultra-religious to the point of being extreme, and from the story it seems that her entire world revolves around her religion. Xiomara, however, questions the religion, but keeps her questions to herself, fearing her mother's wrath. But the manner in which her mother force-feeds Xiomara her religious beliefs definitely borders on abuse, and she uses her religion to emotionally harm both Xiomara and her brother. Now, another secret that Xiomara has kept from her mother is her poetry. Notebook after notebook worth, in which she pours out all of her frustrations, her hopes, her dreams, and all her doubts. So her English teacher invites and urges Xiomara to join her school's slam poetry club, which she wants to do more than anything, but she knows that this is something to which her mother would never, ever agree, and would no doubt severely punish her if she did it behind her back. But regardless of her fear, Xiomara joins the club and skips her confirmation classes in order to do so. And it's through this club that Xiomara experiences a whole new level of freedom. But of course the question is, how long can she keep it up without her mother finding out? So naturally, Xiomara is unable to hide who she is indefinitely, and it's no surprise that it all coalesces into a gigantic explosion. So I was completely blown away by this book, so much so that I ended up devouring it in one day. It's a touching, emotional, spellbinding story of survival and of triumphing to become one's authentic self. I really recommend this, that even if you're not one who's typically a fan of poetry, I ended up loving this book. And the last book that I read this month was a book entitled The Price Guide to the Occult, and this was written by Leslie Walton. I think that's how you pronounce her name. So the story opens up by introducing us to Rona Blackburn, a powerful witch who comes to Anathema Island shortly after the island's founders have established themselves. So frightened by the island's witch, the 8 founding fathers attempt to kill Rona, but are unsuccessful. So enraged by the islanders' deception, Rona places a curse upon all of their descendants, and as well as her own descendants. So then we fast forward to the present day and follows 16-year-old Nor Blackburn, Rona's latest descendant. Now, Nor tries to keep her ever-growing magical abilities under wraps and live as normal of a life as possible. But the thing with Nor is that she's not like the other Blackburn witches before her. Now, up until now, each Blackburn witch had only one supernatural power, which they referred to as burdens. But Nor has several of them. So she's afraid that the others on the island might react to her as they did to her ancestor Rona, or suspect that Nor is dipping into black magic. So she keeps her secret to herself, not even confiding in her grandmother who raised her. In addition, Nor is dealing with severe emotional trauma suffered at the hands of her powerful and sociopath mother named Fern. Though her mother abandoned her when Nor was only a child, the trauma remains, and Nor copes by engaging in self-harm, this self-cutting, which I admit was kind of difficult to read about. So then, a book surfaces at the Wiccan shop where Nor works, entitled The Price Guide to the Occult, which promises to cast any spell at all for the right price. And its author, none other than Vern Blackburn, Nor's evil mother. Moreover, the book divulges actual authentic spells for the Blackburn family. So the book's publication sets in motion events tied to evil black magic, and Nor senses that this evil is coming to the island. She also has little doubt that this evil will be in the form of her mother. But the question is whether Nor's magical abilities are enough to stop her wicked and murderous mother. So overall, this was an enjoyable story with an engaging storyline and rich, interesting characters. Now, it was a tad slow-paced at first, but it really picked up steam toward the last quarter of the book. But be warned, however, that the book does explore some dark themes such as parental abandonment, self-harm, and abuse, which may be triggers for some people. Though it was darker than I had initially expected, I felt that Walton had crafted a wonderfully spooky little story with a great deal of atmosphere and a thrilling sequence of events, leading to quite an explosive climax. It was really a good book, and I enjoyed it. And that is my wrap-up for the first part of May. You can look for my second wrap-up probably in the beginning of June, I would say, first couple days of June. So that's it for today. As always, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate your support, and I will talk to you in the next video. Bye-bye.